So this tutorial is to take you through how to build a lead synth sound with the typical kind of settings you'd hear with a lead instrument. Before we delve into that, a good way of thinking about building up the sounds on a synthesizer is to look at other typical instruments that play a lead role in a piece of music. So the guitar, the electric guitar, is a pretty standard instrument for playing lead solos. So if we have a little listen to this lead guitar. So we're not trying to really replicate the sound of the electric guitar, but what we are interested in is what are some of the fundamental building blocks of a lead sound, and we're going to try and replicate that on a synthesizer. So there were some things we could sort of hear and see the guitarist doing there when he was playing the lead guitar. And it's always good when you're approaching creating a sound on a synthesizer to consider each of these building blocks really carefully and then try and set about creating them rather than just randomly kind of clicking on buttons. So what are the building blocks of the lead sound? Well, first of all, if we can kind of consider the timbre of the instrument, it's definitely sounded that it was kind of distorted and overdriven. So in terms of like how could we replicate that on a synthesizer, you might want to think about sort of quite aggressive waveforms such as square waves or even sawtooth waves. Probably it could be a good kind of timbre to go for initially by setting those on your oscillators, because that will give you that kind of aggression and bite you need for a lead sound to cut through in a mix. In terms of like the EQ of the sound, it's reasonably bright. So in which case you'd probably want to experiment with the filters with a reasonably high cutoff, and experiment with the resonance as well, maybe increasing it slightly to help cut it through and make it sound really bright and quite powerful. As far as distortion and overdrive goes, we can further process the sound with additional effects such as distortion and overdrive, which we'll see in a minute. The envelope of the sound is also really important to consider. By envelope, I'm talking about the ADSR, which is the attack, decay, sustain and release. Now, as we could hear with the electric guitar there's definitely some really well sustained notes. So the sustain would generally probably be quite high, but the attack of the instrument was very fast. And also release as well. When the guitarist stops plucking the string or releases their finger, the release is also generally very quick and it disappears very rapidly. So we're looking at a long sustain, a fast attack and a fast release as well. And we can experiment with the decay, which makes a slightly sort of different percussive sounds, like almost like a plucking string. So we've got timbre, we've got EQ, we've got envelopes as a good starting point. There were some other things that the guitarist was doing as well. He was wiggling his fingers up and down to create a vibrato effect, which I could emulate using an LFO on a synthesizer. There was also things like string bends as well, allowing notes to glide from one to the other, which I can also create on a synthesizer. That's generally a parameter called glide or portamento. And that gives a kind of sliding of one note and bending it into another, which is great for lead sounds. What you'll also notice is the guitarist, he's not playing chords, he's playing one note at a time. If we want to replicate that and enable our synth only to play one note at a time, we need to make sure our synth is set into monophonic mode. Okay? So before I even touch the synthesizer, I've already got a big list of things and thoughts about what it is that I'm trying to create, and that's the best way to approach synthesizing stuff. So let's delve in, let's try and create a lead synth sound. I'm going to use the ES2 because we've used it previously. but there's lots of other synths you could play around with. Remember, you can access all your synths from in here. We've got specific monophonic synths, which might be quite good to play around with. The ES1, which is a simplified version of the ES2. And we've got an FM synth, which we'll look at FM synthesis another day. So first of all, I'm going to reset my synthesizer, analog saw, initialize from the preset. This takes me right back to really just a sawtooth wave. There's a few little modulation things on here which I always recommend you just turn off. There we go, and we are back to a very simple sounding sawtooth wave. At the moment, the synthesizer is in polyphonic mode. It tells me up here, and it enables me to play 6 notes simultaneously, like a chord. Now, I don't want that. I actually want this to be monophonic today, because I'm only playing 1 note at a time, which is great for lead stuff. Even if I try and hold more than 1 note down, it'll only play 1 note. So I'm putting it to monophonic. In terms of my thick kind of distorted timbre that I'm going to aim for, well, I've got my oscillators here, I've got sawtooth waves, I've got square waves as well. What you'll also notice is that the lead guitar stuff was very kind of bright and played high up on the neck of the guitar. So we may want to even tune these oscillators and take them up maybe an octave or a couple of octaves, or we can blend 2 different tones together and go for different pitches. So I'm going to take this one right up to 34. There we go. So I'm just going to blend in a couple of different textures here. Remember also to get a thicker sound, you can slightly detune your oscillators by sense, and that will also hear the difference there. So I'm quite happy with the sound of that. It's quite bright, and I'm quite happy with the initial texture of it. What I'm also going to want to do with my lead solo is bend notes, like the guitarist was doing in the video. Now I can use the pitch bend wheel on my keyboard, and it bends the note up by a tone. So that's gone up from a C to a D. And we can see here the bend range. If I wanted to increase that more, you often see a guitarist bending notes even more than just a tone. Then I can increase my bend range here. I could get it to bend up an octave when I move the pitch bend wheel, which can sound really cool and dramatic for lead solos. Quite funky, probably a bit too much really. You wouldn't be able to bend an octave on a guitar, but there we go. So that's the bend range which you can experiment with. We have a glide option here, which is what I was talking about before, allowing one note to kind of glide into the pitch of the other. It's almost like a portamento sort of effect, and you can experiment with that, turning it up and down. So sounds a little bit too much there. Quite cool. Sounds sort of like bending in from one note to the other. So that's pretty cool. I've got my filter section over here. It's very bright and harsh at the moment. I can play around with the cutoff to sort of suit my tastes really, increasing the resonance. Sort of thins it out a bit. I can play around and get different sort of EQs, if you like, to my lead sound. And then finally the envelope down the bottom here, attack, decay, sustain and release. I'm going to have a long sustain so I can hold notes on, fast attack, pretty fast release. Happy with that. Got some more effects over here I can add to my sound to beef it up even more. So I've got distortion. Got hard, softest kind of clipping of the sound waves that are being created. vibrato effect if I wanted to sort of create that, like we sort of we saw in the video here. So it's doing slides and things like that, which we're getting with these glides, and then the wiggling kind of vibrato effect you could create by putting an LFO on and targeting the pitch of your waves. Now you could control this with the modulation wheel if you wanted to. So we go via the mod wheel. It's a bit extreme. Actually, what we'll do is we'll set the source to the mod wheel. That sounds pretty crazy. Down a bit. We go via LFO2. So this is the mod wheel. Okay, cool. So I'm using the modulation wheel as my source to sort of turn the effect on and off. It's going via the LFO. Now it's the LFO that's creating the wobbling kind of effect. The speed of the wobble I can change by altering that. And the amount that it's kind of wobbling up and down as well is dictated by these little triangles here. And I'm actually just wobbling all the pitches, which is giving me a vibrato effect when I turn the mod wheel up on my keyboard. Yeah, kind of want it a bit faster than that. That sounds pretty cool. There we go. So those are kind of like the thought processes that you need to go through when you're creating a lead instrument sound using subtractive synthesis. Cool. That's it.